They laughed when the plain 34-year-old woman climbed down from the wagon, another desperate mail-order bride come to marry a man she'd never met. The town of Red Hollow had seen plenty of them before, women with nowhere else to go, no beauty left to bargain with. But what those smug ranchers and their cold-eyed wives didn't know was that Evelyn Harper carried something far more dangerous than hope in her worn carpet bag. She carried a mind sharp enough to unravel years of lies, expose the most powerful man in the valley, and force an entire frontier town to its knees. This is the story of a woman who arrived expecting to disappear and instead became the one person no one could ignore. If you want to see how an overlooked woman brought down an empire of corruption with nothing but a ledger and her voice, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far Evelyn's story can travel. The wagon lurched to a stop outside Miller's General Store, and Evelyn Harper gripped the side rail hard enough to leave marks in the wood. Red Hollow stretched before her like a judgment she hadn't yet failed. Dusty streets, weathered storefronts, men in work-stained shirts leaning against porch rails with their arms crossed. The July heat pressed down on everything, making the air shimmer above the rutted road. "This your stop, ma'am?" The driver didn't look at her when he said it. He'd barely looked at her the entire 3-day journey from Dodge City. Evelyn climbed down, her gray traveling dress already damp with sweat, her hands shaking just enough that she had to steady herself against the wagon wheel. She was 34 years old. She had $17 sewn into the lining of her carpet bag. And she was here to marry a man named Caleb Mercer, a rancher she'd corresponded with exactly 4 times by letter. The driver dropped her bag in the dirt without ceremony and drove off before she could even say thank you. She stood there, alone, while the town took its measure of her. It didn't take long. "Lord have mercy." The voice came from a woman in a blue calico dress standing near the store entrance. She wasn't whispering. "Did you see her face?" "Plain as a post," another woman replied, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. "Poor Mr. Mercer." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she kept her expression smooth. She'd heard worse, much worse. In St. Louis, the boarding house women had called her the old maid with the sad eyes. In Jefferson City, a potential employer had told her she had the look of someone who'd given up. She'd learned not to flinch, but it still hurt. She picked up her bag and walked toward the general store, keeping her head level even though her stomach was twisting itself into knots. The wooden steps creaked under her boots. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with the smell of coffee, leather, and tobacco. A man behind the counter, balding, with suspicious eyes, watched her approach. "I'm looking for Caleb Mercer," Evelyn said quietly. The man scratched his jaw. "You the mail-order woman?" "I am," he grunted. "Mercer's out at his ranch, 6 miles west. You'll have to wait till someone's heading that direction, or you can walk." He said it like walking 6 miles in the July heat was a perfectly reasonable suggestion. Evelyn opened her mouth to reply, but a voice cut through from the doorway behind her. "She won't be walking." Evelyn turned. The man in the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, and sunburned in the way that only years of outdoor labor could accomplish. His dark hair needed a trim, and his jaw was shadowed with a few days of stubble. He wore a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, work trousers held up by suspenders, and boots caked in dried mud. He wasn't handsome in the polished way men in St. Louis had been handsome, but there was something solid about him, something steady. He looked directly at her, and his expression didn't change. No surprise, no disappointment, just quiet assessment. "You're Evelyn Harper," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Caleb Mercer." He stepped inside and held out his hand. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, calloused, and warm. He shook her hand the same way he might shake a man's hand, respectfully, without hesitation. "I appreciate you coming all this way," Caleb said. "I know it wasn't easy." Evelyn blinked. She'd expected a dozen different reactions when she finally met the man she'd agreed to marry. Regret, disappointment, awkward silence. She had not expected courtesy. "I'm glad to be here," she said, and meant it more than she'd expected to. Caleb nodded once, then glanced at the storekeeper. "Put whatever she needs on my account, Miller." Miller grunted again, but didn't argue. Caleb picked up her bag without asking and gestured toward the door. Wagon's outside. We'll head out before it gets any hotter. Evelyn followed him into the sunlight, still trying to process the fact that he hadn't looked at her like she was a disappointment he'd have to live with. Outside, a sturdy wagon hitched to two dark horses waited in the shade. Caleb set her bag in the back and offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. As they pulled away from the store, Evelyn caught sight of the two women in calico dresses staring after them, whispering behind their hands. Caleb didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. They rode in silence for the first mile. The land stretched out flat and golden, broken only by distant hills and the occasional cluster of cottonwood trees. The heat shimmered in waves, and the wagon wheels kicked up small clouds of dust. Finally, Caleb spoke. "You read my letters." "I did." "Then you know I'm not much for talking." Evelyn glanced at him. His eyes stayed on the road ahead. "That's fine. I work hard. I keep my land clean. I pay my debts." He paused. "I don't drink, and I don't gamble. I'm not cruel. That's more than most men can say." He looked at her then, just for a moment. "I'm not expecting you to fall in love with me, Miss Harper, but I am expecting honesty and respect. I'll give you the same." Evelyn's throat tightened. She'd been bracing herself for a man who would see her as a burden, a last resort, something to be tolerated. Instead, she was sitting next to someone who sounded like he'd thought this through carefully and meant every word. "That sounds fair?" she said quietly. Caleb nodded and turned his attention back to the horses. The ranch appeared over a low rise about 30 minutes later. It wasn't large, but it was well kept. A two-story house with a wide porch, a barn in good repair, a chicken coop, a corral with several horses, and fields that stretched out toward the hills. Everything looked clean, organized, functional. Caleb pulled the wagon up near the house and climbed down. He offered his hand again, and this time Evelyn took it without hesitation. "I'll show you around," he said. "Then you can decide if you want to stay." Evelyn stared at him. "Decide?" "You came all this way based on letters," Caleb said evenly. "You should see what you're agreeing to before we make anything official." She didn't know what to say to that. Every other arrangement she'd heard of treated the woman like a package that had been delivered and opened, return not possible. "All right," she said. He led her through the house first. It was simple but clean, wood floors, plain furniture, a kitchen with a good stove and a sturdy table. Upstairs there were two bedrooms. Caleb gestured to the larger one. "This one's yours. I'll take the smaller one down the hall until we figure things out." Evelyn looked at the room, at the bed with the clean quilt, the window overlooking the fields, the small dresser waiting to be filled. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I'm not going to rush you into anything you're not ready for." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. "Marriage is a partnership, not ownership." Evelyn turned to look at him fully. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said, and this time her voice broke just a little. Caleb nodded once and left her alone. That first night, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table after supper and tried to make sense of where she'd landed. Caleb had cooked, simple food, but good, and they'd eaten mostly in silence. He'd asked her a few questions about her journey, listened to her answers, and hadn't pried when she kept things brief. Now he was outside checking the barn, and she was alone with her thoughts. She'd expected to arrive in Red Hollow and immediately begin the work of making herself useful, of proving she was worth the trouble. She'd expected to be treated like a servant, or worse, like a burden Caleb had agreed to carry out of desperation. Instead, she'd been given a room of her own, respect, space to breathe. It was more than she'd had in years. The door opened and Caleb stepped inside, brushing dust off his sleeves. He glanced at her, then at the papers spread across the table. Letters, receipts, a small ledger she'd been carrying in her bag. "You keep records?" he asked. "I do?" Evelyn hesitated. "I worked as a bookkeeper for a dry goods store in St. Louis. Before—" She stopped herself. "Before what?" "Before the owner's son decided I was too old to be useful." She said it flatly, without self-pity. "He hired someone younger, prettier." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Can you keep books for a ranch?" Evelyn looked up sharply. "Yes." "Good." He stood, walked to a shelf near the stove, and pulled down a thick leather ledger. He set it in front of her. "This is everything. Income, expenses, debts, purchases. It's a mess. I know how to run a ranch, but I'm not good with numbers. Evelyn opened the ledger carefully. The pages were filled with Caleb's handwriting, cramped, inconsistent, full of crossed out lines and smudged ink. But the information was all there. Grain sales, livestock purchases, property taxes. You want me to organize this? She asked. I want you to take it over, Caleb said. If you're willing. Evelyn stared at him. You're serious? Dead serious. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed again. I need someone I can trust to manage the finances. If we're going to be partners, that means I trust you with this. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn felt something other than fear or exhaustion. She felt wanted. I'll do it, she said. Caleb nodded. Good. Start tomorrow. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of work. Evelyn woke early, made breakfast, and spent the mornings going through every page of Caleb's financial records. In the afternoons, she helped with the ranch, feeding chickens, mending fences, organizing supplies. In the evenings, she cooked, and they ate together in companionable silence. Caleb kept his word. He didn't push. He didn't ask for more than she was ready to give, but he also didn't treat her like a stranger. He taught her how to handle the horses, showed her which crops grew best in the valley, explained the rhythms of ranch life with the kind of patience she hadn't expected. And slowly, carefully, Evelyn began to relax. She was good with the ledger, better than good. She caught mistakes Caleb had made, reorganized his accounts into clear categories, and started tracking expenses in a way that revealed patterns he'd never noticed. One evening, she set down her pen and frowned. What is it? Caleb asked from across the table. Evelyn tapped the page. Your grain sales don't match the mill receipts. What do you mean? You sold 40 bushels of wheat to the mill in April. The mill receipt says 40 bushels, but the payment you received was for 36. Caleb leaned forward. Maybe I miscounted. Maybe. Evelyn flipped back through earlier pages. But it happened again in March, and February, and January. Caleb's expression darkened. You're saying someone's shorting me. I'm saying the numbers don't add up. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening fields. The mill's run by Arthur Kern. He's been in Red Hollow for 20 years. Everyone trusts him. Do you trust him? Evelyn asked quietly. Caleb didn't answer right away. Finally, he turned back to her. No, not anymore. Evelyn closed the ledger carefully. If he's doing it to you, he's probably doing it to others. Then we need to find out. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn became obsessed. She went through every grain sale Caleb had made over the past 3 years, cross-referencing receipts with payments. The pattern was consistent. Every sale was short by 3 to 5 bushels. It didn't seem like much at first, but when she added it up, Caleb had lost nearly $200 over 3 years. $200. That was a year's worth of work. We have to report this, Evelyn said one night. Caleb shook his head. Who are we going to report it to? The sheriff plays cards with Kern every Friday night. The mayor owes him money. Half the town does business with him. Then we go to the other ranchers, Evelyn said firmly. We show them the numbers. If he's stealing from you, he's stealing from them too. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You're sure about this? I'm sure. This won't be easy. Kern's powerful. People are going to push back. Evelyn met his gaze. I didn't come all this way to stay quiet, Caleb. Something shifted in his expression then. Something that looked almost like pride. All right, he said. Then we do this together. The next Sunday after church, Evelyn and Caleb approached 3 neighboring ranchers, Daniel Foster, Tom Brennan, and James Cole. They gathered outside the churchyard, away from prying eyes, and Evelyn laid out the evidence. At first, the men were skeptical. You're saying Kern's been stealing from us? Tom Brennan crossed his arms. That's a hell of an accusation. I'm saying the numbers don't lie, Evelyn replied calmly. She handed him a sheet of paper. This is your grain sale from last October. You sold 52 bushels. The receipt says 52, but the payment was for 48. Tom stared at the paper. His jaw tightened. Check your own records, Evelyn said. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. Tom looked at Caleb. You believe this? I do, Caleb said. Tom folded the paper and stuffed it in his pocket. I'll check if you're right. He shook his head. This is going to get ugly. It already is, Evelyn said. By the end of the week, 5 ranchers had checked their records. All 5 had been shorted. The amounts varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. Arthur Kern had been stealing from the entire valley. And now, Evelyn Harper, the plain 34-year-old mail-order bride everyone had dismissed, was the only one who'd noticed. Word spread quickly. By the following Sunday, nearly a dozen families were quietly comparing their grain receipts and realizing they'd all been cheated. The anger simmered just below the surface, and Evelyn found herself at the center of it. But not everyone was grateful. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked through town to pick up supplies, 2 women stopped her outside the dry goods store. "You're stirring up trouble," one of them said coldly. Evelyn recognized her, Margaret Carlson, the woman in the blue calico dress who'd mocked her the day she arrived. "I'm telling the truth," Evelyn replied evenly. "You're accusing a respected businessman based on some numbers in a ledger," Margaret snapped. "Arthur Kern has done more for this town than you ever will." "He's been stealing," Evelyn said, "from your husbands, from your neighbors." "You don't belong here," the other woman hissed. "You're just some desperate woman who came here because no one else wanted you. Don't pretend you're doing this for us." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm doing this because it's right," Margaret sneered. "You think you're clever because you can add numbers? You're nothing. And once people realize you're just causing problems, they'll run you out of town." Evelyn turned and walked away before her voice could break. That night, she sat on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening fields. She felt the weight of every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment in her life when she'd been told she wasn't enough. The door opened behind her and Caleb stepped outside. He sat down beside her without saying anything. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I should have kept quiet." "Do you believe that?" Caleb asked. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No." "Then don't let them make you doubt yourself." Caleb's voice was firm. "You're the smartest person in this valley, Evelyn. You saw something no one else saw. You're standing up when everyone else is too scared. That takes courage." Evelyn looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I do." Something loosened in her chest. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like someone saw her, really saw her. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "We're going to finish this, together." And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn Harper believed that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where she didn't have to shrink herself to survive. The morning after Margaret Carlson's confrontation, Evelyn woke before dawn and found Caleb already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He glanced up when she entered, but didn't say anything about the redness around her eyes or the fact that she'd barely slept. He just poured her a cup and set it on the table. "Tom Brennan's coming by this morning," Caleb said. "Says he found something in his old records. Wants to show us." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "What kind of something?" "Didn't say, but he sounded angry." Tom arrived an hour later, his wagon kicking up dust as it barreled down the road toward the house. He climbed down before the horses had fully stopped, clutching a leather satchel against his chest. "I went back 5 years," Tom said without preamble. He dumped the satchel's contents onto the kitchen table, dozens of receipts, payment slips, and handwritten notes. 5 years, Caleb. Every single grain sale I made to Kern's mill. Every single one was short. Evelyn moved closer, sorting through the papers with practiced efficiency. Her fingers flew across the receipts, checking dates, amounts, calculations. "How much?" Caleb asked quietly. Tom's jaw was so tight, Evelyn thought it might crack. $340. The number hung in the air like something physical. "That's more than I make in a year," Tom said, his voice shaking. "I've been breaking my back on that land, watching my wife go without new dresses, telling my kids we can't afford to fix the roof because money's tight. And that son of a bitch has been stealing from me the whole time." Evelyn set down the receipts she'd been examining. "It's not just you, Tom. If he did this to you and Caleb, he did it to everyone." "Then we need to tell people," Tom said. "We need to get everyone together and what?" Caleb interrupted. "Storm the mill? Kern's not going to just admit it. He'll deny everything, say we're making mistakes, that we miscounted. Then we get the sheriff involved," Tom shot back. The sheriff plays cards with Kern every Friday, Evelyn said. He's not going to help us. Tom slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the coffee cups rattle. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Just let him keep stealing? Evelyn looked at Caleb, then back at Tom. We gather more evidence. We talk to every rancher in the valley. We show them exactly what he's been doing. And then we confront him publicly, with so many people behind us that he can't deny it or hide. Tom stared at her. You really think that'll work? I think it's the only thing that will work, Evelyn said. Kern's power comes from people trusting him. We take that away and he's got nothing. Caleb nodded slowly. She's right. We do this carefully, with numbers and proof, and we make it so public he can't squirm out of it. Tom looked between them, then let out a long breath. All right. What do you need from me? Your records, Evelyn said, and the names of every rancher you know who sells grain to the mill. Tom pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Already made a list, 16 families. Evelyn took the list and scanned the names. Some she recognized from church, others she'd never heard of. We'll need to talk to all of them, she said. That's going to take time, Caleb warned. And word's going to spread fast once we start asking questions. Let it spread, Evelyn said. Maybe that'll make people pay attention. Over the next 10 days, Evelyn and Caleb visited every ranch on Tom's list. Some families welcomed them. Others were suspicious. A few slammed doors in their faces. At the Morrison Ranch, a weathered woman named Sarah listened to Evelyn's explanation, then disappeared into her house and returned with a wooden box full of receipts dating back 7 years. I knew something was wrong, Sarah said quietly. Every year we'd sell more grain, but somehow we'd have less money. My husband kept saying we were just spending too much, that I needed to be more careful. But I knew something wasn't right. Evelyn went through the receipts while Sarah watched. The pattern was unmistakable. Every sale shorted by 3 to 6 bushels, the discrepancies hidden in plain sight. How much did he take from you? Sarah asked. Evelyn did the math quickly in her head. $420. Sarah's face went pale. She sat down hard in a wooden chair, her hands trembling. 400... I'm sorry, Evelyn said. Sarah shook her head. Don't apologize. You're the first person who believed me when I said the numbers didn't make sense. She looked up, her eyes fierce despite the tears. What can I do to help? At the Cole Ranch, James Cole wasn't as welcoming. I don't know what you think you're doing, James said from his porch, not inviting them inside. But you're going to get people hurt, stirring up trouble like this. We're not stirring up trouble, Caleb said evenly. We're exposing theft. You're accusing a man who's been a pillar of this community for 20 years, James snapped. Based on what? Some numbers a mail-order bride thinks don't add up? Evelyn felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but she kept her voice steady. Check your own records, Mr. Cole. If I'm wrong, I'll leave you alone. James crossed his arms. I don't need some woman telling me how to run my finances. Then run them yourself, Evelyn said. But when you realize you've been losing money for years and didn't notice, don't come crying to us for help. She turned and walked back to the wagon before James could respond. Caleb followed, and they drove away in tense silence. You all right? Caleb asked after a few minutes. I'm fine, Evelyn said, though her hands were clenched tight in her lap. He's scared, Caleb said. That's why he's lashing out. He doesn't want to believe someone he trusted could do this. He'd rather believe I'm a liar than admit he's been a fool, Evelyn said bitterly. Caleb glanced at her. You're not a liar, and he's going to realize that eventually. 2 days later, James Cole showed up at their door, hat in hand, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. You were right, he said without preamble. I went through everything, 7 years of sales. He took over $500 from me. Evelyn stepped aside to let him in. James sat at the kitchen table, his face gray. I should have listened to you, he said quietly. I didn't want it to be true. None of us did, Caleb said. James looked at Evelyn. I'm sorry for what I said. Evelyn nodded once. We need your records, and we need you to stand with us when we confront him. James met her eyes. You'll have both. By the end of 2 weeks, Evelyn had gathered evidence from 14 ranching families. The total amount stolen was staggering, nearly $1,500 spread across years of fraudulent transactions. She documented everything in a new ledger, cross-referencing receipts with payments, creating a timeline of theft that was impossible to dispute. But the more evidence they gathered, the more dangerous the situation became. One evening, as Evelyn walked back from the chicken coop, a man she didn't recognize stepped out from behind the barn. He was tall, heavy-set, with a scar running down his left cheek. "You're making some powerful people nervous," the man said. Evelyn's heart kicked into her throat, but she kept her voice level. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Arthur Kern's a friend of mine," the man said, moving closer. "He's a good man, and he doesn't appreciate being slandered by some nobody who doesn't know her place." "I'm not slandering anyone," Evelyn said, taking a step back. "I'm telling the truth." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Truth's a funny thing. Sometimes it's better to keep quiet about certain truths, if you know what I mean." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you advice." He leaned in close enough that Evelyn could smell tobacco on his breath. "Drop this. Go back to being a quiet little housewife, or things are going to get real uncomfortable for you and your husband." Before Evelyn could respond, Caleb's voice cut through the twilight. "Get off my property!" The man turned. Caleb stood 20 feet away, holding a rifle across his chest, not pointing it, just holding it. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just having a conversation." "Conversation's over," Caleb said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. The man looked at Evelyn one more time, then walked slowly toward the road. He climbed onto a horse tied near the fence and rode off without looking back. Evelyn realized she was shaking. Caleb lowered the rifle and walked over to her. "You hurt?" "No, he was trying to scare me." "Did it work?" Evelyn thought about lying, but she didn't. "Yes," Caleb nodded. "Good. That means you're smart enough to know this is dangerous." He looked in the direction the man had ridden. "But we're not stopping." "No," Evelyn agreed. "We're not." That night, they sat at the kitchen table and made a plan. They would organize a meeting at the church, neutral ground where everyone could gather. They would present the evidence publicly, all at once, with every affected family standing together. They would force Kern to answer for what he'd done. "He's going to fight back," Caleb said. "I know." "People might turn on you, on us." "I know that too." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her like that, deliberately, gently. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We could leave. Start over somewhere else." Evelyn looked down at their joined hands. "I spent my whole life running from people who made me feel small. I'm not doing it anymore." Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. "Then we finish this." The meeting was set for the following Sunday after services. Word spread quickly, and by Friday, half the town knew something big was about to happen. Evelyn spent Saturday organizing her evidence, checking and rechecking every number, making sure there were no mistakes Kern could exploit. Caleb worked outside, fixing a broken fence rail and pretending he wasn't as nervous as she was. That evening, Tom Brennan stopped by with news. "Kern knows," Tom said as soon as he stepped inside. "He knows about the meeting, and he's planning to bring the sheriff and a lawyer." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "A lawyer?" "He's going to claim we're all mistaken," Tom said, "that the shortages were honest errors, that we miscounted, that he has documentation proving otherwise." "He's lying," Evelyn said. "Of course he's lying," Tom shot back. "But he's got money and connections. We've got grain receipts and angry farmers." Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then we make sure our evidence is so solid he can't talk his way out of it." "How?" Tom asked. Evelyn stood abruptly and walked to the shelf where she kept her ledger. She pulled it down and flipped to a specific page. "We don't just show them the individual thefts," she said slowly. "We show them the pattern, the system. We prove it's not random errors. It's deliberate, calculated fraud." She spread the ledger across the table. "Look, every shortage is between 3 and 6 bushels. Never more, never less. If these were honest mistakes, the numbers would be random. But they're not. They're consistent. Kern's been skimming just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough that any single farmer would notice." Tom stared at the numbers. "Can you prove that?" "I already have," Evelyn said. She pulled out a chart she'd drawn showing the theft pattern over 5 years. Every sale, every month, every year, the percentages are almost identical. Caleb moved closer to study the chart. "This is good. This is really good." Tom let out a slow breath. He's not going to be able to explain this away. No, Evelyn agreed. He's not. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Evelyn dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she'd mended twice, but still looked respectable. She tied her hair back and forced herself to eat breakfast, even though her stomach was in knots. Caleb was quiet, but he stayed close to her, a steady presence that helped keep her nerves from completely unraveling. They arrived at the church early. Tom was already there, along with Sarah Morrison, Daniel Foster, and James Cole. One by one, the other families arrived, 14 households in all, carrying boxes of receipts and years of grievances. The church filled quickly. By the time the regular service ended, there were nearly 60 people packed into the pews and standing along the walls. And then Arthur Kern walked in. He was a large man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of being the most important person in any room. He wore a fine suit, and he walked like he owned the building. Behind him came Sheriff Daniels and a thin man in spectacles who had to be the lawyer. Kern surveyed the room, his expression calm and faintly amused, as if this were all some kind of misunderstanding he could clear up with a few well-chosen words. "Well," Kern said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "quite a gathering." Tom Brennan stood. "We're here because we have questions about your business practices, Arthur." Kern smiled. "Questions? Tom, we've been doing business together for 15 years. If you had questions, you could have just asked me." "I'm asking now," Tom said, "and so are they." He gestured to the families gathered around him. Kern's smile faded slightly. "I see. And what exactly are you accusing me of?" Evelyn stood, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "Theft," she said clearly. "Systematic, deliberate theft." The room went silent. Kern's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time she saw something cold flicker behind his eyes. "And you are?" he asked. "Evelyn Mercer," she said, using Caleb's last name even though they hadn't officially married yet. It felt right. "Ah," Kern said, "the mail-order bride. I've heard about you, stirring up trouble with your little ledgers." "I'm presenting evidence," Evelyn said. "Evidence that shows you've been shorting grain payments for at least 5 years. Kern laughed, a big booming sound designed to make her seem ridiculous. "Shorting payments? My dear woman, running a mill involves thousands of transactions. Mistakes happen. If there were discrepancies, I'm sure we can resolve them." "These aren't mistakes," Evelyn said. She held up her ledger. "These are deliberate, consistent thefts. Every sale shorted by 3 to 6 bushels, every payment calculated to avoid suspicion. You've stolen nearly $1,500 from the families in this room." The crowd murmured. Kern's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation," the lawyer said, stepping forward. "Do you have proof?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes." She spent the next 20 minutes walking the room through her findings. She showed them the pattern, the consistency, the mathematical impossibility of so many identical errors. She presented receipts, payment slips, and her own meticulous calculations, and she did it calmly, clearly, without emotion. Just facts. By the time she finished, the room was dead silent. Kern's face had gone from amused to stony. "This is absurd. You're basing all of this on the assumption that I'm some kind of criminal, when the far more likely explanation is that you've made errors in your calculations." "Then show us your records," Caleb said, standing beside Evelyn. "If her calculations are wrong, prove it." Kern's jaw tightened. "I don't have to prove anything. My reputation speaks for itself." "Your reputation is based on 20 years of people trusting you," Sarah Morrison said, standing up. "But trust isn't proof, and the numbers don't lie." "She's right," James Cole added. "I checked my own records. You stole $500 from me, Arthur. $500 I needed to feed my family." One by one, other ranchers stood up, voicing their losses, their anger, their betrayal. Kern looked around the room, and for the first time, Evelyn saw something like fear in his eyes. "This is a witch hunt," Kern said loudly. "You're all being manipulated by a woman who doesn't know what she's talking about." "Then take us to court," Tom Brennan said. "Let a judge look at the evidence." The lawyer leaned in and whispered something to Kern. Kern's face went pale. "I think," the lawyer said carefully, "that my client would like to discuss a settlement." The room erupted. Evelyn stood in the middle of the chaos, shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion, barely able to believe what was happening.
Caleb's hand found hers again, and he squeezed gently. "You did it," he said quietly. She looked up at him, and for the first time in years, Evelyn Harper felt like she'd done something that mattered, something real, something that couldn't be taken away or dismissed. She'd spoken up, she'd stood her ground, and she'd won.
But winning wasn't the end of it, not even close. The meeting broke up in shouting and confusion, with Kern's lawyer pulling him toward the door while ranchers pressed forward demanding answers. Sheriff Daniels tried to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by angry families who'd just learned they'd been robbed for years while he'd sat playing cards with the thief. Evelyn found herself surrounded by people, some thanking her, some asking questions, some just staring like they couldn't quite believe what had happened. Sarah Morrison hugged her so hard Evelyn couldn't breathe. Tom Brennan shook Caleb's hand 3 times. James Cole stood off to the side, looking like he'd been punched in the stomach. Through it all, Evelyn kept her eyes on Kern. He'd made it to the church door, but he'd stopped there, turning back to look at the crowd. His face was pale, his confidence stripped away. And when his gaze found hers across the room, she saw something ugly twist in his expression. Then he was gone, disappearing into the bright Sunday afternoon with his lawyer and the sheriff trailing behind him. Caleb touched her elbow. "We should go." Evelyn nodded, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. They slipped out through the side door and climbed into their wagon without speaking to anyone else. The ride home was quiet, except for the creak of wheels and the steady clip of hooves on packed dirt. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "You know this isn't over." "I know. Kern's not going to just hand over $1,500 and walk away. He's going to fight." Evelyn looked at him. "Let him fight. We have the evidence." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Evidence doesn't always matter when the other side has money and connections. He could drag this out for months, make our lives hell while he does it. "Then we'll survive months of hell," Evelyn said. The words came out sharper than she intended. She softened her voice. "I'm not backing down, Caleb. Not now." He glanced at her, and something in his expression shifted. "I'm not asking you to back down. I'm just saying we need to be ready for what comes next." "What do you think comes next?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "But nothing good." He was right. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later when Tom Brennan's barn caught fire. It happened in the middle of the night, and by the time Tom and his family got outside, half the structure was already engulfed. They managed to get the horses out, but they lost the barn, a season's worth of stored hay, and most of their tools. The fire marshal ruled it an accident. "A lantern knocked over," he said, though Tom swore up and down that he'd never left a lantern burning in the barn. Then Daniel Foster's fence line was cut, and 20 head of cattle wandered onto the road. It took 2 days to round them all up, and 3 were hit by a freight wagon in the meantime. A week after that, someone broke into James Cole's grain storage and contaminated an entire month's harvest with kerosene. The smell was so strong, the grain was unsalvageable. None of it could be proven. None of it could be traced back to Kern. But everyone knew. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table late one night, reviewing the incidents in her ledger, like they were just more numbers to track. Caleb watched her from across the room, his face grim. "He's trying to scare everyone into dropping this," Evelyn said. "It's working," Caleb replied. "James came by this afternoon, said he's thinking about letting it go. Says the loss of that grain cost him more than Kern ever stole." Evelyn's pen stopped moving. "He can't give up now. Not after everything we've done." "He's scared. They all are. And they have a right to be." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Are you scared?" Caleb didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "I'm worried. There's a difference." "Worried about what?" "About you." He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark fields. "You're the one Kern blames for all this. You're the one who put the evidence together, who stood up in that church and called him a thief in front of the whole town. If he's going to come after anyone, it'll be you." The words settled heavy in the quiet kitchen. Evelyn set down her pen. "So what do you want me to do?" she asked. "Hide? Pretend I didn't see what I saw?" "I want you to be safe," Caleb said. "I'm not going to be safe as long as Kern's still out there doing whatever he wants," Evelyn said. "None of us are." Caleb turned to face her. "Then what's the plan? We can't just wait for him to destroy everyone who stood against him." Evelyn thought about it. about the barn fire and the cut fences and the ruined grain, about the fear spreading through the valley like a sickness. "We go to his house," she said suddenly. Caleb stared at her. "What?" "We go to Kern's house. All of us. Every family he's hurt. We bring the evidence, we bring a witness who isn't the sheriff, and we demand a settlement right there. Public, final. No lawyers, no delays. He pays what he owes, or we take it to the territorial court and make sure everyone between here and Denver knows what he did." "You think he'll agree to that?" "I think if we show up on his doorstep with enough people, he won't have a choice." Caleb shook his head slowly. "That's dangerous, Evelyn. If we back him into a corner like that, there's no telling what he'll do." "He's already dangerous," Evelyn said. "At least this way we're facing him directly instead of waiting for him to pick us off one by one." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to the table and sat down across from her. "All right," he said. "We'll do it your way. But we do it smart. We bring everyone, we make it public. And we don't go alone." Evelyn nodded. "Agreed." "And if things go wrong, they won't." "If they do," Caleb said firmly, "you get out. You don't argue. You don't try to fix it. You just get out. Understood?" Evelyn met his eyes. She could see the worry there, the fear he was trying to hide, and underneath it, something else, something that made her chest tighten. "Understood," she said quietly. It took 3 days to organize. Tom Brennan agreed to help spread the word, and one by one, the affected families committed to coming. Not everyone was willing. James Cole refused outright, and 2 other families said they couldn't risk more trouble. But in the end, they had 11 households ready to make the trip. They set the meeting for Saturday afternoon, late enough that Kern would be home, but early enough that there'd still be daylight. Evelyn spent the days leading up to it preparing her documentation, organizing the evidence into a clear, undeniable presentation. She made copies of the key pages in case Kern tried to destroy the originals. She rehearsed her arguments until Caleb told her to stop before she wore out her own voice. The morning of the confrontation, Evelyn woke up with her stomach in knots. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair back tight, putting on her most severe dress. She wanted to look like someone who couldn't be dismissed or intimidated. Caleb was already outside hitching the horses. When Evelyn came out, he paused and looked at her. "You ready?" he asked. "No," Evelyn said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." He nodded and offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. His grip was warm and steady, and Evelyn held on just a moment longer than necessary. They met the others at the crossroads 2 miles outside town, 11 wagons in all, carrying families and evidence, and a determination that felt fragile in the bright afternoon sun. Tom Brennan rode up front with his wife Martha beside him. Sarah Morrison drove her own wagon, her jaw set in a hard line. Daniel Foster brought his 2 oldest sons, both of them carrying rifles. "Everyone's here," Tom said when Caleb pulled alongside him. "You sure about this?" "No," Caleb said, "but we're doing it anyway." Tom nodded grimly. "Let's get this over with." The caravan rolled through town, drawing stares from people on the street. Word had spread about what they were planning, and by the time they reached Kern's property on the far side of Red Hollow, there were at least 20 townspeople following at a distance, curious or concerned or just hungry for drama. Kern's house was large, 2 stories, painted white, with a wide porch and a manicured lawn that stood in sharp contrast to the dusty ranches most of them lived on. It was the house of a man who'd done well for himself, or appeared to have done well for himself. Evelyn wondered how much of it had been built with stolen money. They pulled the wagons up in a loose semicircle in front of the house. One by one, families climbed down and gathered together, forming a crowd that was bigger than Evelyn had expected. Not just the 11 families who'd committed, but their children, their hired hands, even a few neighbors who'd decided to come along. Kern appeared on the porch before anyone knocked. He'd been watching from the window, Evelyn realized, waiting. He looked different than he had at the church, less polished. His shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven, but his eyes were sharp and calculating as he surveyed the crowd. "Well," Kern said, his voice carrying across the yard, "this is quite a welcoming party." "We're not here for pleasantries," Tom Brennan called out. "We're here for what you owe us." Kern's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "I don't owe you anything, Tom. I explained that at the church. Any discrepancies in our transactions were honest mistakes, and
They weren't mistakes, Evelyn said, stepping forward. She held up her ledger. They were theft. Systematic, deliberate, calculated theft. And we have proof. Kern's gaze locked onto her. Miss Harper, still playing bookkeeper, I see. Mrs. Mercer, Evelyn corrected, using Caleb's name again. It felt like armor. And I'm not playing. I have documentation of every fraudulent transaction you made over the past 5 years, every shorted payment, every stolen dollar. It's all here. Documentation, Kern repeated mockingly. You have chicken scratch in a ledger and the word of farmers too lazy to keep proper records themselves. Then prove us wrong, Sarah Morrison said, stepping up beside Evelyn. Show us your mill records. Show us the receipts that prove you paid what you owed. I don't have to prove anything to you, Kern snapped. This is harassment. I should have the sheriff arrest the lot of you for trespassing. The sheriff can't help you anymore, Daniel Foster said. Half the town knows what you've been doing. You think he's going to risk his job protecting a thief? Kern's face flushed red. Get off my property, all of you, now. Not until you pay what you owe, Tom said. I don't owe you anything. $1,500, Evelyn said clearly. That's what you stole from the families standing here. $1,500 that kept farms from prospering, that kept children from getting what they needed, that kept families struggling while you built yourself a nice house and threw fancy dinners. You have no proof. I have all the proof I need, Evelyn interrupted. And if you don't settle this today, right here, I'm taking it to the territorial court in Denver. I'll make sure every newspaper between here and the Capitol knows exactly what Arthur Kern of Red Hollow did to his neighbors. The threat landed. Evelyn could see it in the way Kern's expression shifted, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. You wouldn't dare, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Try me, Evelyn said. For a long moment, no one moved. The crowd stood silent, waiting. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the front door opened behind Kern, and a woman stepped out. She was younger than Kern, dressed in an expensive blue dress, with dark hair pinned elegantly on top of her head. Kern's wife, Evelyn realized. She'd seen her once or twice in town, but never spoken to her. Arthur, the woman said quietly. What's going on? Kern turned. Catherine, go back inside. But Catherine didn't move. She looked past her husband at the crowd gathered in their yard, at the wagons and the grim faces and the tension crackling in the air. Are they saying you stole from them? Catherine asked. It's a misunderstanding, Kern said quickly. They're confused about— I'm not confused, Evelyn said, addressing Catherine directly. Your husband has been systematically shorting grain payments to every rancher in this valley for at least 5 years. He's stolen nearly $1,500. I have the documentation to prove it. Catherine's face went pale. She looked at her husband. Arthur? Don't listen to her, Kern said. She's just some desperate woman trying to make trouble. I'm telling the truth, Evelyn said, and I think you know that. Catherine stared at her husband for a long, terrible moment. Then she turned and walked back into the house without another word. Kern watched her go, something crumbling in his expression. When he turned back to the crowd, he looked 10 years older. How much? He asked roughly. What? Tom said. How much do you want to make this go away? Evelyn felt a surge of something that might have been triumph, but it was sour in her mouth. Every dollar you stole. With interest. That's $1,800 total. Kern laughed, but it was a broken sound. I don't have $1,800. Then you'll figure out how to get it, Evelyn said. Sell something. Take a loan. I don't care. But you'll pay it back and you'll do it within 30 days or I'm going to Denver. And if I refuse? Then you'll lose everything, Caleb said, speaking for the first time. Your business. Your reputation. Your standing in this town. Everything. Kern looked at him, then back at Evelyn. She could see him weighing his options, calculating the risks, trying to find a way out. There wasn't one. 30 days, Kern said finally, his voice hollow. But I want it in writing that this settles everything. No more accusations, no more harassment. Fine, Tom Brennan said. We'll draw up an agreement. You pay what you owe, we drop it. But if you try to run, or if you miss the deadline, the deal's off and we go public. Kern nodded stiffly. He looked like a man who'd just lost a war. The crowd began to disperse, families climbing back into their wagons with a mix of relief and disbelief. Some were celebrating, others just looked exhausted. Evelyn stood still, watching Kern retreat into his house. She felt numb, empty, like she'd spent everything she had and wasn't sure what was left. Caleb appeared at her elbow. "You did it." "We did it," Evelyn corrected. "No," Caleb said. "This was you. You're the one who saw the pattern. You're the one who convinced everyone to stand together. You're the one who just brought down the most powerful man in the valley." Evelyn looked up at him. "I don't feel like I brought anyone down. I feel like I just threw a rock at a hornet's nest." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but sometimes that's what it takes." They rode home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. More comfortable, less weighted. That night, after supper, Caleb built a fire in the hearth, even though it wasn't particularly cold. They sat together on the porch steps, watching the flames through the window, neither of them ready to go to bed yet. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. "Now we wait," Caleb said. "See if Kern keeps his word. And if he doesn't? Then we go to Denver, like you said." He glanced at her. "You'd really do that, wouldn't you? Take this all the way to the territorial court?" "Yes," Evelyn said without hesitation. "I would." Caleb shook his head, but he was almost smiling. "You're something else, Evelyn Harper." "Mercer," Evelyn said quietly. "I've been calling myself Mercer for weeks now. Might as well make it official." Caleb went very still. "What are you saying?" Evelyn's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm saying I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I don't want to be here because I had nowhere else to go. I want to be here because this is where I choose to be. With you." "Evelyn." Caleb's voice was rough. "I know it's not romantic," Evelyn said quickly. "I know this isn't how things are supposed to happen, but I'm tired of pretending this is just an arrangement. You've treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone in my entire life. You believed in me when no one else did, and I—" Caleb kissed her. It wasn't a long kiss or a particularly graceful one. He leaned in quickly, cupping her face in his calloused hands, and pressed his mouth to hers like he'd been holding himself back for months and couldn't do it anymore. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I wanted to do that the day you arrived," he admitted. "I saw you standing in front of the general store, looking scared and brave at the same time, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Evelyn stared at him. "Beautiful?" "Yes." "Caleb, I'm not—" "You are," he said firmly. "Not in the way people usually mean when they say that, but in a way that matters. You're smart and fierce and honest. You don't back down when things get hard. You fight for what's right even when it costs you. That's beautiful. You're beautiful." Evelyn's throat closed up. She'd spent so many years being told she wasn't enough, not pretty enough, not young enough, not charming enough. And here was this man, this quiet, steady man, telling her she was everything. "I want to marry you," Evelyn whispered. "Properly. Not as an arrangement. As a real marriage." Caleb's smile was slow and genuine. "Then let's do it. Tomorrow, if you want. I'll get the preacher, and we'll make it official." "Tomorrow's too soon," Evelyn said, though she was smiling now too. "But soon. As soon as all this is settled." "Deal," Caleb said. And then he kissed her again, slower this time, like they had all the time in the world. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Kern stayed out of sight, hidden away in his big white house. Rumors swirled through town. Some said he was trying to raise the money. Others said he was planning to run. A few claimed he'd had a breakdown and wasn't leaving his bedroom. Evelyn didn't care about the rumors. She cared about the deadline. She spent her days working on the ranch, helping Caleb with the late summer harvest, reorganizing his accounts now that she knew exactly how much money they actually had. In the evenings, she and Caleb sat together on the porch, talking about plans for the future, expanding the herd, planting winter wheat, building a proper office where Evelyn could manage the books without spreading papers all over the kitchen table. It felt real, permanent, like a life she could actually build instead of just survive. On the 28th day after the confrontation, Tom Brennan rode up to the house with news. "Kern's ready to pay," Tom said, climbing down from his horse. "He sent word this morning, wants everyone to meet at the bank tomorrow at noon." Evelyn and Caleb exchanged glances. "He's actually going to do it," Evelyn said. "Looks like it," Tom replied. "Guess he decided his reputation was worth $1,800. Or his wife made the decision for him," Caleb muttered.
Tom grinned. Either way, we're getting paid. The next day, every affected family gathered at the Red Hollow Bank. It was a small building, barely big enough to hold them all, but the bank manager had agreed to oversee the transaction and serve as an official witness. Kern arrived exactly at noon, accompanied by his lawyer and carrying a heavy leather satchel. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were hollow. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked to the front of the room, set the satchel on the manager's desk, and opened it. Inside were stacks of bills, carefully counted and bound. $1,800, the lawyer said. As agreed. In exchange, all parties will sign a settlement acknowledging that this resolves all disputes regarding past business transactions with Mr. Kern's mill. The bank manager counted the money slowly, checking each stack twice. When he was satisfied, he nodded. It's all here. Tom Brennan stepped forward. Then let's get the paperwork done. It took another hour to divide the money fairly, based on the amounts each family had been shorted. Evelyn watched as families who'd struggled for years received envelopes containing hundreds of dollars. Sarah Morrison cried when she counted her share, $420 that would keep her ranch running through the winter. Daniel Foster just stood there holding his money like he couldn't quite believe it was real. When it was Caleb's turn, the manager handed him an envelope containing $200. Caleb opened it, looked inside, and nodded. It's right, he said. Then he turned to Evelyn and held out the envelope. This is yours. You're the one who found it. You should have it. Evelyn shook her head. It's ours. I'm just the one who knew how to add. Caleb smiled at that, and for a moment the tension in the room eased. Finally, every family had been paid. The lawyer produced the settlement agreement, and one by one, people signed. When it was Evelyn's turn, she hesitated, looking at Kern one last time. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered. Part of her felt sorry for him, but only a small part. She signed her name neat and clear and set down the pen. It was done. Outside, the families dispersed, some heading straight home, others stopping at the general store to pay off debts they'd been carrying for years. The mood was lighter than it had been in weeks, almost celebratory, but Evelyn couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. That night she said as much to Caleb. I thought I'd feel different, she admitted. They were lying in bed, Caleb's bed, their bed now, with the window open to let in the cool night air. I thought winning would feel like something more. What does it feel like? Caleb asked. Like we stopped something bad from continuing, Evelyn said slowly, but not like we fixed everything. There are still people in this town who think I was wrong to speak up. There are still people who'll never forgive me for making waves. Caleb rolled onto his side to look at her. Does that bother you? Yes, Evelyn said honestly, but not as much as staying silent would have. Caleb reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You changed this valley, Evelyn. You gave people their money back, yeah, but you did more than that. You showed them they didn't have to just accept being cheated, that they could stand up and demand better. Some of them still hate me for it. Some of them do, Caleb agreed, but some of them see you as a hero, and the ones who matter see you as someone brave enough to do what needed doing. Evelyn closed her eyes. I just wanted to be useful. I just wanted to prove I had value. You did, Caleb said softly, and you are. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at him. This man who'd given her respect when she'd expected pity, who'd trusted her with his finances and his home and his heart. I love you, she said. The words came out simple and certain, like they'd been waiting there the whole time. Caleb's expression softened into something that made her chest ache. I love you too. And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Evelyn Harper, Evelyn Mercer now, in all the ways that mattered, felt like she'd finally found the place where she was meant to be. The changes came gradually at first, like spring thaw creeping across frozen ground. The morning after they'd collected the settlement money, Evelyn walked into Miller's general store to buy flour and found the storekeeper actually looking at her when she spoke, instead of past her shoulder like she was something unpleasant he'd rather ignore. Morning, Mrs. Mercer, Miller said, and there was something different in his voice. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition. Morning, Evelyn replied, setting her basket on the counter. Miller measured out the flour without comment, then added an extra scoop. No charge for that bit. Consider it a thank you. Evelyn blinked.
For what? For what you did. Miller tied off the flour sack and set it in her basket.
My brother's got a ranch out near the Foster place. You got him back $300 he thought was just gone forever. He's been able to pay off debts he's been carrying for 2 years. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. I just did the math. Yeah, well, Miller rang up her purchases. Sometimes that's enough. When Evelyn stepped back outside, she found Sarah Morrison waiting by her wagon with a covered basket. I made extra bread this morning, Sarah said, handing it over before Evelyn could protest. Figured you could use it with everything you've been dealing with. Sarah, you don't have to.
I know I don't have to, Sarah interrupted gently. I want to. You gave me back my farm, Evelyn. The least I can do is share some bread. After Sarah left, Evelyn stood there in the morning sun, holding the basket and feeling something strange and unfamiliar unfolding in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as belonging. Not the desperate, fragile belonging of someone trying to earn their place, but the solid kind that came from having already earned it. But not everyone felt that way. 2 days later, Evelyn was hanging laundry when Margaret Carlson appeared at the property line, her face pinched tight with anger. You're proud of yourself, aren't you? Margaret called out. Evelyn set down the wet sheet she'd been about to pin up. Excuse me? Margaret marched closer, stopping just short of the fence. You ruined Arthur Kern, destroyed a man's reputation over some numbers in a ledger. I exposed theft, Evelyn said evenly. There's a difference. He was a pillar of this community, Margaret snapped. He gave money to the church. He sponsored the Harvest Festival. He helped families when they needed it. And you tore him down because you wanted to feel important. Evelyn felt anger rising in her throat, sharp and hot. He stole $1,500 from families who were already struggling, families with children who went hungry while he built himself a fancy house. That's who you're defending. Those families should have kept better records, Margaret shot back, should have paid attention instead of blaming their problems on someone else. They trusted him, Evelyn said, and he betrayed that trust, systematically, for years. Margaret's face twisted. You know what I think? I think you came here desperate and unwanted, and the only way you could feel like you mattered was by destroying someone who actually belonged. You're nothing but a bitter old maid who— That's enough. Caleb's voice cut across the yard like a whip crack. He'd come around from the barn, his expression hard. Get off my property, Margaret. Margaret's mouth snapped shut. She looked between them, her face flushed with fury and something that might have been embarrassment. This isn't over, she said. Yes, it is, Caleb replied. Kern's settled. It's done. And if you keep harassing my wife, we're going to have a problem. Margaret turned and stormed off without another word. Evelyn stood there, her hands shaking slightly, until Caleb walked over and pulled her into a hug. She leaned into him, breathing in the smell of hay and leather and sunshine. You all right? He asked. I'm fine, Evelyn said. I thought after the settlement, people would move on. Some have, Caleb said. Some won't. Margaret's husband does business with Kern. She's going to see you as the enemy no matter what. I can live with that, Evelyn said, pulling back to look at him. I just wish it didn't have to be a fight. It's always a fight when you challenge power, Caleb said, but you're not fighting alone anymore. That weekend, Tom Brennan came by with an offer that surprised them both. The Valley Ranchers are forming a co-op, Tom said, sitting at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Pooling resources, negotiating better prices, maybe even building our own grain storage so we're not dependent on mills like Kern's. That's smart, Caleb said. It was Daniel Foster's idea, but everyone agrees it's the right move. Tom looked at Evelyn. We want you to manage the finances. Evelyn nearly dropped her own coffee cup. What? You're the best with numbers any of us have ever seen, Tom said. You caught theft that the rest of us missed for years. If we're going to do this co-op right, we need someone we can trust to keep the books clean and catch problems before they become disasters. Tom, I don't know anything about running a co-op. Neither do we, Tom said with a slight smile. But we know you're honest, and we know you're smart, and that's more important than experience. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Evelyn looked at Caleb. He was watching her with that steady gaze that had become so familiar, so grounding. What do you think? She asked. I think you'd be good at it, Caleb said, but it's your choice. Evelyn turned back to Tom. Her Her heart was racing, but not with fear this time, with something that felt almost like excitement. "I'll do it," she said, "on one condition. I want to set up proper accounting systems from the start. Standard forms, regular audits, transparent records that any member can review. No secrets." Tom grinned. "That's exactly what we want. When can you start?" "Give me a week to get organized," Evelyn said. "Then we'll set up a proper office and get this done right." After Tom left, Evelyn paced the kitchen, her mind already racing through systems and structures and solutions. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Caleb said from his chair. Evelyn stopped and laughed. "I'm sorry, I've never been asked to do something like this before. Something important. Something that matters." "Everything you do matters," Caleb said. "But yeah, this is big." "Are you sure you're all right with it?" Evelyn asked. "It's going to take time. I'll be meeting with ranchers, organizing records, probably riding out to different properties to check on things." Caleb stood and walked over to her. "Evelyn, I married you because you're brilliant and capable and brave. I'm not going to ask you to be less than that just because it's convenient for me. You do this co-op work and I'll handle things here. We'll figure it out together." Evelyn reached up and kissed him, quick and grateful. "How did I get so lucky?" "I ask myself the same thing every day," Caleb said, and the look in his eyes made her believe he meant it. The co-op office was set up in a converted storage room behind the Red Hollow Community Hall. It wasn't much, just a desk, some shelves, and a filing cabinet Tom had salvaged from somewhere, but it was Evelyn's. Her space. Her responsibility. She threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd brought to exposing Kern's fraud. She designed standardized ledger systems for each member ranch, created inventory tracking forms, and established monthly reporting requirements. She rode out to properties to assess their needs and capabilities, learning which ranchers were good with cattle versus crops, who had extra labor capacity, who needed help. Within a month, the co-op had 12 member ranches. Within 2 months, they'd negotiated a bulk purchase agreement with a grain dealer in Denver that saved everyone money. Within 3 months, they'd pooled resources to repair Tom Brennan's barn, which still hadn't been fully rebuilt after the fire. Evelyn found that she was good at this work. Not just the numbers, but the people part too. She learned to listen to complaints and concerns without taking them personally. She learned to mediate disputes between members who disagreed about priorities. She learned to explain complex financial decisions in ways that made sense to people who'd never had formal education. And slowly, grudgingly, people who'd dismissed her as just another mail-order bride started treating her like someone whose opinion mattered. One afternoon in early October, Evelyn was reviewing inventory reports when Daniel Foster knocked on her office door. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course." Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What do you need?" Daniel sat down heavily. He looked tired, his face weathered by sun and worry. "I wanted to ask you something about my oldest boy, Jacob." "All right." "He's 17, smart kid, good with figures like you." Daniel hesitated. "But he's not much for ranching, never has been. He'd rather sit with a ledger than ride fence line." Evelyn waited, sensing where this was going. "I was wondering if you could teach him," Daniel said. "Bookkeeping, accounting, whatever you call it. Teach him to do what you do." Evelyn blinked. "You want me to teach him?" "You're the best accountant in the valley," Daniel said simply. "Maybe the best in the territory. And Jacob needs to learn a trade that actually fits him instead of trying to force himself into something he's not built for." "Daniel, I don't have any formal training," Evelyn said. "Everything I know, I learned by doing." "That's even better," Daniel replied. "You can teach him practical work, not just theory, and you can show him that being good with numbers is valuable, that it matters." Evelyn thought about it, about the years she'd spent feeling useless because she didn't fit into the narrow roles people expected women to fill. About how different her life might have been if someone had told her earlier that her skills had worth. "Send him by tomorrow," she said. "We'll start with basic ledger systems and see how he does." Daniel's face split into a rare smile. "Thank you, Evelyn. Really." Jacob Foster turned out to be a natural. He was quiet and serious, with his father's work ethic and a genuine love for organizing information that reminded Evelyn of herself. Within 2 weeks, he was helping her process membership payments. Within a month, he was handling basic bookkeeping tasks independently.
You're good at this, Evelyn told him one afternoon as they reviewed his work. Really good. Jacob looked up, surprised. You think so?
I know so, Evelyn said. You have an eye for detail and you're methodical. Those are the most important skills for this kind of work. My pa says I should stick with ranching, Jacob admitted quietly. Says a man needs to know how to work the land. Evelyn set down the ledger she'd been checking. Your father sent you here to learn from me. That means part of him understands that there are different kinds of valuable work. But it's your life, Jacob. You get to decide what matters to you. What if I decide wrong? Then you try something else, Evelyn said. That's what I did. I spent years in jobs that didn't fit, with people who didn't value what I could do. And then I came here and found work that mattered. You'll find yours too. Jacob nodded slowly, and Evelyn saw something shift in his expression. Something that looked like hope. The first real cold snap came in late October, bringing frost that killed the last of the garden plants and sent everyone scrambling to prepare for winter. Evelyn spent a long day helping Caleb move cattle to winter pasture, then came home exhausted and frozen through. She was heating water for tea when someone knocked on the door. It was Catherine Kern. Evelyn almost didn't recognize her at first. Arthur Kern's wife looked thinner than she had at the confrontation, her fine dress replaced with something simpler, her hair pinned back without the careful elegance Evelyn remembered. Mrs. Kern, Evelyn said, too surprised to say anything else. May I come in? Catherine asked. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Evelyn stepped aside and let her in. Catherine stood in the kitchen, looking around at the simple, clean space like she was seeing something foreign. Can I offer you tea? Evelyn asked. No, thank you. I won't stay long. Catherine took a breath. I came to apologize. Evelyn stared at her. For what? For my husband. For what he did. For what he put you through. Catherine's hands twisted together. I didn't know. About the theft, I mean. I knew Arthur was difficult sometimes, proud, but I didn't know he was stealing from people. You're not responsible for his choices, Evelyn said carefully. Maybe not, but I benefited from them. Catherine looked around the kitchen again. Everything we had, the house, the clothes, the comfortable life, it was built on money that should have gone to families like yours. And I didn't question it. I should have, but I didn't. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent so much energy being angry at Arthur Kern that she'd never really thought about his wife, about what it must have been like to discover that your entire life was built on lies. What will you do now? Evelyn asked. We're leaving, Catherine said. Arthur sold the mill to a buyer from Denver. We're moving back east to Philadelphia. Starting over, I suppose. She paused. He's not the same man anymore. The shame of it, it broke something in him. I'm sorry, Evelyn said, and meant it. Not sorry for exposing the truth, but sorry that the truth had cost so much. Don't be, Catherine said. You did what was right, what someone should have done years ago. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. What is it? $300, Catherine said. It's all I could scrape together without Arthur knowing. I want you to put it toward your co-op. Use it to help the families he hurt. Evelyn took the envelope, feeling the weight of the bills inside. Catherine, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, Catherine said, but it's what I can do. She moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back. You're remarkable, you know. The way you stood up to Arthur, the way you fought for those families. I wish I had half your courage. You're here now, Evelyn said. That takes courage, too. Catherine smiled sadly. Maybe. Goodbye, Mrs. Mercer. I hope your co-op succeeds. After she left, Evelyn stood in the kitchen holding the envelope and feeling the strange complexity of the world pressing in on her. Nothing was as simple as she'd wanted it to be. Exposing Kern had been necessary and right, but it had created ripples she hadn't fully anticipated, pain and consequences that spread wider than just the man who'd committed the crime. When Caleb came in from the barn, she showed him the money and told him about Catherine's visit. What do you want to do with it? Caleb asked. Evelyn thought about it. I want to use it for a scholarship fund, for kids from ranching families who want to learn trades beyond farming, bookkeeping, carpentry, teaching, whatever they're drawn to, so they have options. Caleb's expression softened.
That's a good idea. Catherine said I was remarkable, Evelyn said quietly. But I don't feel remarkable. I feel like I just did what needed doing, and somehow it turned into something bigger than I expected. That's usually how remarkable things happen, Caleb said. One small choice at a time. The first public acknowledgement came in early November, when the Red Hollow Town Council held their monthly meeting and invited Evelyn to present an update on the co-op. She stood in front of 30 people, town leaders, business owners, curious citizens, and walked them through the co-op's first quarter results. Membership numbers, cost savings, successful group purchases, plans for expanding into shared equipment and labor pools. When she finished, Mayor Williams stood up from his chair at the front table. Mrs. Mercer, he said formally, on behalf of the town council, I'd like to thank you for the work you've done, not just with the co-op, but in exposing the fraud at Kearns Mill. You've strengthened this community. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped. Evelyn could see a few faces that remained stony and disapproving, but most did. And it wasn't polite, obligatory applause. It was genuine. Evelyn felt her face flush. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and sat back down. After the meeting, people came up to thank her personally. Ranchers whose farms were doing better because of the co-op savings. Townspeople who appreciated that someone had finally held Kern accountable. Even a few of the women who'd whispered about her when she first arrived now shook her hand and told her she'd done well. Tom Brennan found her on the steps outside afterward. You know what I'm hearing, he said. People are saying the co-op should hire you permanently, pay you a real salary to manage it full time. Evelyn looked at him sharply. Are you serious? Dead serious, Tom said. The co-op's grown too big for you to keep managing it for free while also helping Caleb with the ranch. We've got the resources now to pay for professional management, and you're the best person for the job. I don't know, Tom. I've never had a real position like that before. You've been doing the work already, Tom pointed out. We'd just be paying you properly for it. Think about it. On the ride home, Evelyn told Caleb about the offer. What do you think? She asked. I think you should take it, Caleb said without hesitation. It's what you're good at, what you love doing. But what about the ranch? I'm supposed to be helping you. You do help me, Caleb said. But you're not my employee, Evelyn. You're my wife, my partner. And part of being partners means supporting each other's work. You support my ranching. I'll support your bookkeeping. It'll mean I'm gone more, Evelyn warned. Meetings, property visits, probably some travel to Denver to negotiate with suppliers. Then I'll miss you when you're gone and be glad when you're back, Caleb said simply. Take the job. You've earned it. The formal offer came 2 weeks later. A salary of $40 a month, more money than Evelyn had ever made in her life. Her own office, her own authority, her own sphere of influence. She accepted immediately. By December, Evelyn Mercer was the official paid manager of the Red Hollow Valley Ranchers Cooperative. She had 17 member ranches under her supervision, a filing system that actually worked, and a growing reputation as someone who could solve problems and keep finances clean. But the real change wasn't in the work. It was in how people saw her. When she walked through town now, people nodded to her. Store owners asked her opinion on business matters. Women who'd once sneered invited her to church socials. Children ran up to ask if she was the lady who was teaching Jacob Foster to be a bookkeeper because their older brother wanted to learn too. She wasn't just Caleb Mercer's mail-order bride anymore. She wasn't just the woman who'd exposed Kern. She was Evelyn Mercer, co-op manager, community member, someone who belonged. One cold Sunday morning in mid-December, as Evelyn and Caleb walked out of church, Margaret Carlson stopped them on the steps. Evelyn braced herself for another confrontation, but Margaret just stood there, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer, Margaret said stiffly, I owe you an apology. Evelyn blinked. Excuse me? I was wrong, Margaret continued. About Arthur Kern. About what you did. My husband showed me the records from his own grain sales last week. Kern had been stealing from us too. I just didn't want to admit it. Margaret, you were right, Margaret interrupted. And I was cruel. I'm sorry for the things I said. I was defending someone who didn't deserve it and attacking someone who did. Evelyn looked at this woman who'd been her harshest critic, who'd called her bitter and desperate and unwanted. She could hold on to that anger. She probably had a right to, but she was tired of being angry. Thank you for saying that, Evelyn said. I appreciate it. Margaret nodded once, then turned and walked away before Evelyn could say anything else. Well, Caleb said after she'd gone, that's something. Yeah, Evelyn agreed. It is. That night, as they sat by the fire, Evelyn found herself thinking about how far she'd come since stepping off that wagon in July. She'd arrived expecting nothing, hoping for very little, prepared to make herself small and quiet and useful. Instead, she'd become someone loud when she needed to be, someone who fought for what was right, someone who'd changed an entire valley just by refusing to accept that theft was normal or inevitable. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked from his chair. About the woman I was when I got here, Evelyn said. About how scared I was, how sure I was that I'd have to shrink myself to survive. And now? Now I know I don't have to be small, Evelyn said. I can be exactly who I am, smart and stubborn and good with numbers, and that's enough. More than enough. Caleb reached over and took her hand. It's more than enough. It's everything. Evelyn squeezed his fingers, feeling the calluses from years of ranch work, the steady warmth that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. I love this life, she said quietly. I love this place. I love you. I love you too, Caleb said, and I'm proud of you. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've become. I'm proud to be married to you. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears, the kind that came from finally being seen for who she really was and being told that was exactly who she should be. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and white and clean, covering the valley in silence. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, filling the house with warmth, and Evelyn Mercer sat with her husband's hand in hers, knowing that she'd found something she'd spent her whole life searching for. Not just a home, not just respect, but a place where being herself, smart, capable, fierce, imperfect, was not just tolerated but valued, where her voice mattered, where her work made a difference, where she belonged. The winter passed in a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, though Evelyn knew nothing about her life would ever be ordinary again. She managed the co-op through the slow months, helping members plan for spring planting, negotiating supply contracts, teaching Jacob Foster advanced accounting techniques that she was making up as she went. Caleb worked the ranch, repaired equipment, and spent his evenings sitting with her by the fire while she reviewed ledgers and he mended tack. They settled into marriage like two people who'd been doing it for years instead of months. There were disagreements, of course. Caleb thought she worked too much. Evelyn thought he didn't ask for help when he needed it. But they learned to navigate them without either person having to disappear. That was new for Evelyn, being able to argue without fearing abandonment, being able to say what she needed without it being held against her later. In late February, Tom Brennan came by with news that the co-op membership had grown to 23 ranches. They were going to need more space, maybe even a proper building instead of the converted storage room. We're also going to need more help, Tom said. You're doing the work of 3 people, Evelyn. We need to hire an assistant. I can manage, Evelyn said automatically. Tom gave her a look. You can manage because you're working 12-hour days and barely taking Sundays off. That's not sustainable. Hire Jacob full-time, train him up proper, let him handle the routine stuff so you can focus on the bigger picture. Evelyn wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. She'd been running herself ragged trying to prove she could handle everything alone, trying to show that trusting her had been the right choice. All right, she said. I'll talk to Jacob and his father. Daniel Foster agreed immediately. Jacob started the following week, and Evelyn discovered that having help didn't make her less valuable. It made her more effective. She could spend time on strategic planning instead of filing receipts. She could visit member ranches and actually talk to people instead of rushing through quick inspections. She could think instead of just react. It was a lesson she was still learning, that asking for help wasn't weakness, and that trying to do everything herself wasn't strength. It was just exhaustion wearing a noble mask. Spring came early that year, melting the snow by mid-March and bringing the first green shoots pushing up through the mud. Evelyn spent a warm afternoon in the garden, planting vegetables and thinking about the scholarship fund she'd started with Catherine Kern's money. 3 families had already applied for support to send their children to trade schools in Denver. The application sat on her desk, waiting for review. She was just finishing the last row of beans when she heard wagon wheels on the road. She looked up to see a familiar rig pulling into the yard, Sarah Morrison's wagon, but Sarah wasn't alone. There were 4 other women with her. Evelyn wiped the dirt from her hands and walked over to meet them. Sarah? What's going on? Sarah climbed down, and the other women followed. Martha Brennan, Ann Foster, Rebecca Cole, and a younger woman Evelyn recognized from church, but whose name she couldn't recall. We need your help, Sarah said without preamble. Or rather, we need you to teach us what you know. Evelyn blinked. Teach you what? How to keep books, Martha Brennan said. How to track finances properly. How to catch when someone's cheating us. My husband handles all the money, Ann Foster added. And I trust him, I do. But after what happened with Kern, I realized I don't actually know anything about our finances. I can't read the ledgers. I don't understand the contracts. If something went wrong, I'd have no idea. We want to learn, Rebecca Cole said. Not because we don't trust our husbands, but because we should know. We should understand our own households. The younger woman, Evelyn finally remembered her name was Lucy Wright, spoke up shyly. And some of us aren't married yet, but will be soon. I don't want to go into marriage blind about money. I want to know how to protect myself. Evelyn looked at the 5 women standing in her yard, all of them watching her with expressions that mixed hope and determination, and felt something shift in her chest. When do you want to start? She asked. They met every Wednesday afternoon in the co-op office. Evelyn started with the absolute basics: how to read a ledger, how to track income and expenses, how to identify discrepancies. Some of the women picked it up quickly. Others struggled but kept coming back, asking questions until they understood. Word spread. By April, she had 12 women attending regularly. By May, there were 18, including several from town who weren't connected to ranches but wanted to understand their family finances. The men didn't know what to make of it at first. Some were supportive. Others were suspicious, worried their wives were learning to question them. A few were outright hostile. One evening, Evelyn was locking up the office when a man she didn't recognize blocked her path. You're teaching women to be dissatisfied, he said. His breath smelled like whiskey. Teaching them to doubt their husbands. I'm teaching them arithmetic, Evelyn replied calmly. If that makes you nervous, maybe you should examine why. The man's face darkened. Women who get too smart start thinking they don't need their husbands. Start getting ideas above their station. Women who understand money are less likely to be cheated or controlled, Evelyn said. If that threatens you, that says more about you than it does about them. She stepped around him and walked to her wagon without looking back. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her spine straight and her head up. She was done shrinking herself for men who felt diminished by her simply knowing things. Caleb was waiting for her when she got home. One look at her face and he knew something had happened. What is it? Evelyn told him about the confrontation. When she finished, Caleb was quiet for a moment. Do you want to stop the classes? He asked. No, Evelyn said immediately. Why would I stop? Because some men in this town are going to make trouble about it. You know that, right? They're going to say you're undermining marriages, corrupting women, causing problems. Let them say it, Evelyn said. Those women deserve to understand their own finances. They deserve to have the tools to protect themselves if they need to. I'm not stopping because it makes insecure men uncomfortable. Caleb's expression softened into something that might have been pride. Good. Then we'll deal with whatever comes. What came was a town council meeting in early June where several men formally complained about the classes. They stood up one by one and listed their grievances. Wives questioning financial decisions, women wanting to be involved in business discussions, the general disruption of traditional household order. Evelyn sat in the back of the room and listened to them paint her as some kind of dangerous radical for teaching basic bookkeeping. When they finished, Mayor Williams looked at her. Mrs. Mercer, would you like to respond? Evelyn stood. Every eye in the room turned to her. I'm teaching arithmetic, she said clearly. Addition, subtraction, how to read a ledger. The same skills I use to manage the co-op that has saved your ranches thousands of dollars. If your wives learning these skills threatens you, perhaps you should ask yourself why you need them to be ignorant to feel secure. Women don't need to understand business, one of the complainants said. That's the husband's responsibility. And what happens when the husband dies? Sarah Morrison called out from the side of the room. Several other women murmured agreement. What happens when the woman is left alone with no understanding of her own finances? I'll tell you what happens. She gets cheated, taken advantage of, lost. I've seen it happen. I won't let it happen to my daughters. This isn't about protecting women, another voice said. Evelyn turned to see Martha Brennan standing up. This is about protecting men from accountability. You don't want us to learn because you don't want us to question. Well, I'm done not questioning. If my husband is making good decisions, he should be able to explain them to me. And if he can't, I deserve to know why. The room erupted into argument, men shouting at their wives, women shouting back, Mayor Williams banging his gavel and calling for order. Finally, the mayor held up his hand. Enough. Mrs. Mercer's classes are private gatherings. She's not doing anything illegal or even improper. If your wives want to attend, that's between you and them. This council has no authority to shut down education. Meeting adjourned. Evelyn walked out of that meeting with her hand shaking but her head high. Outside, a dozen women surrounded her. Thank you for not backing down, Lucy Wright said quietly. Thank you for standing up with me, Evelyn replied. The classes continued. More women joined. And slowly, imperceptibly, things began to shift in Red Hollow. Women started asking about household finances, started reviewing purchases, started catching small errors and discrepancies that had gone unnoticed for years. Most of the time it was innocent, sloppy bookkeeping, honest mistakes. But occasionally it was more than that. A husband hiding gambling debts, a father-in-law siphoning money from a joint account. Small betrayals that might have gone undetected if the women hadn't learned to look. Some marriages got stronger, some got rockier, but all of them got more honest. By midsummer, the co-op was thriving. Membership had reached 30 ranches. They'd built a proper building, a small office structure with a meeting room, file storage, and space for Jacob to work. Evelyn had hired a second assistant, a woman named Grace, who'd been in her bookkeeping classes and showed real aptitude. The scholarship fund had sent 5 young people to trade schools. Jacob Foster was handling most of the routine accounting independently. The women's bookkeeping classes had expanded into basic business skills, contract negotiation, property rights, even basic law. Evelyn Mercer had become something she'd never imagined being. A community leader. Someone people came to for advice and guidance. Someone whose opinion carried weight. But the change that mattered most happened on a warm evening in late July, almost exactly a year after she'd first arrived in Red Hollow. Caleb found her in the garden after supper, sitting on the bench he'd built for her birthday in May, watching the sun set over the western hills. Got something to show you, he said. What is it? Come see. He led her to the barn, then past it toward a small outbuilding she'd assumed was just storage. But when Caleb opened the door, Evelyn saw something completely different. The space had been transformed into an office, a proper office, with a large desk positioned to catch the afternoon light, shelves built along 2 walls, a comfortable chair, even a small stove for heat in the winter. The desk held a new lamp, fresh ledgers, a set of good pens. Evelyn stood in the doorway, speechless. I know you've got the co-op office in town, Caleb said, but I thought you might want a space here too, for your personal work or just somewhere quiet to think. When did you do this? Evelyn asked, her voice thick. Been working on it since spring. Had to do it while you were at meetings so you wouldn't catch me. He looked almost nervous. Do you like it? Evelyn walked into the space, running her hand along the smooth desktop, looking at the shelves that were exactly the right height, the window positioned perfectly. I love it, she whispered. Caleb, this is the most thoughtful thing anyone's ever done for me. He moved closer, putting his hands on her shoulders. You changed my life, Evelyn. You changed this whole valley. You deserve a place that's just yours, where you can do the work you love. Evelyn turned to face him, and the expression on his face made her throat close up. Not pity, not obligation, just pure, uncomplicated love. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. When I got on that wagon to come here last summer, I thought my life was basically over. I thought I was going to a place where I'd be tolerated at best, resented at worst, where I'd have to make myself small and quiet and useful just to survive. I know, Caleb said softly. But you never asked me to be small, Evelyn continued. From the very first day you treated me like I had value, like my mind mattered, like I was worth respecting, and that changed everything. You did have value, Caleb said. You always did. I just saw it. That's the thing, though, Evelyn said. I don't think I actually believed it until you showed me. I spent so many years being told I wasn't enough, not pretty enough, not young enough, not charming enough, that I'd started to believe it. I'd started to think that being smart was just compensation for everything else I lacked. Evelyn, let me finish, she said gently. I need to say this. Being here with you, building this life, it taught me that intelligence isn't a consolation prize for not being beautiful. It's not a crutch or a substitute for what I'm supposedly missing. It's valuable in its own right. It's powerful. And women don't have to choose between being valued for their minds or their appearance. We can demand both. We can demand to be seen as whole people. Caleb pulled her close, and Evelyn leaned into him, breathing in the familiar smell of him. You taught me that I don't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable, she continued. That speaking up isn't selfish, that knowing things and using that knowledge isn't arrogance, that I can be exactly who I am, opinionated and stubborn and good with numbers, and still be worthy of love. You were always worthy of love, Caleb said into her hair. But I'm glad I got to be the one who showed you that. They stood there in her new office as the evening light faded, holding each other in the space he'd built for her, and Evelyn felt something she'd been chasing her whole life finally settle into place. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the end of challenges, but the confidence to face them. Not perfection, but enough. The summer passed into fall and fall into winter again. The co-op continued to grow. The bookkeeping classes continued. Jacob Foster announced he was going to Denver to study accounting formally, with plans to come back and open the Valley's first independent accounting office. Grace took over more of the daily co-op management, freeing up Evelyn to focus on strategic planning and the scholarship program. 2 more ranches joined the co-op. 3 more young people received scholarship support. The women's education program expanded into a full curriculum covering financial literacy, property law, and business management. And through it all, Evelyn and Caleb built their life together. They had good days and hard days. Days when everything felt possible, and days when problems seemed insurmountable. They argued about money and time management and whose turn it was to deal with the chickens. They made love in their bed and in the garden, and once, memorably, in her new office. They learned each other's rhythms and moods and soft places. They built a real marriage. Not the arrangement she'd signed up for, but something deeper and more solid than she'd known was possible. One Sunday in late November, almost a year and a half after that first confrontation at the church, Evelyn stood up during the community announcements and made a statement. I want to thank this community for the trust you've placed in me, she said, her voice carrying through the quiet room. When I arrived here, I was a stranger, an outsider, someone easy to dismiss. But you gave me a chance to prove my value. You let me do work that mattered, and in doing that, you gave me something I'd been looking for my whole life, a place to belong. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. Some friendly, some neutral, a few still disapproving, but all of them listening. I also want to say something to the women in this room, especially the young ones. Your intelligence is not a consolation prize for not being pretty enough. Your skills are not personality flaws that need to be hidden. Your knowledge is not something to apologize for. You have every right to understand your own finances, your own property, your own lives. And anyone who tells you that wanting to know things makes you difficult or unfeminine or unwifely is someone who benefits from your ignorance. Don't let them convince you that being smart is somehow unwomanly. The two aren't in opposition. They never were. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah Morrison started clapping. Martha Brennan joined her. Then Ann Foster and Rebecca Cole and Lucy Wright and a dozen other women, their applause filling the space like a challenge and a promise. Some of the men clapped too. Not all, but enough. Evelyn sat back down beside Caleb, her heart racing. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I'm proud of me too, Evelyn whispered back, and realized she meant it. Later that evening, Evelyn stood in her office, the one Caleb had built, her private space, and looked at the ledgers and papers that represented everything she'd built. The co-op, the scholarship fund, the education program, the small revolution she'd started just by refusing to stay quiet about theft. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that wagon 18 months ago, terrified and desperate, and certain she was going to have to disappear to survive.
That woman had been so afraid of taking up space, so convinced that being noticed meant being rejected. And now here she was, noticed, respected, valued not despite her intelligence, but because of it. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been threats and confrontations and moments when she'd wondered if fighting was worth it. There had been people who still thought she was too loud, too opinionated, too much. There probably always would be. But she'd learned something crucial along the way. She'd learned that being told you're too much by people who benefit from you being less isn't criticism. It's confirmation that you're exactly as much as you need to be. She'd learned that making people uncomfortable isn't always wrong. Sometimes it's the only way to make things right. She'd learned that you can't earn respect by shrinking yourself. You earn it by being so undeniably good at what you do that even the people who want to dismiss you can't. Most importantly, she'd learned that the right person won't ask you to be smaller. They'll build you an office and tell you to take up all the space you need. The door opened behind her and Caleb stuck his head in. "You coming to bed?" "In a minute," Evelyn said. "Just finishing up." But she wasn't finishing anything. She was starting to understand that her story wasn't about a desperate woman who got lucky. It was about a capable woman who finally found a place that recognized her capability. It wasn't about being rescued, it was about being seen. And once you've been truly seen, not for what you look like or how old you are or whether you fit into some narrow definition of acceptable femininity, but for what you can do and who you are, you can never go back to being invisible. You can never again accept being dismissed or diminished or told to be quiet. That was the real revolution. Not exposing Kern's theft, though that mattered. Not building the co-op or teaching those classes, though those mattered too. The real revolution was internal. It was the moment she'd stopped measuring her worth by other people's limited vision and started measuring it by her own accomplishments. She was 35 years old now. She had work she loved and a man who loved her and a community that had learned to value what she brought to it. She had purpose and place and power. She was exactly who she'd always been, smart, thorough, unwilling to ignore injustice. But now she was those things without apology, without shame, without the constant undercurrent of fear that being herself was somehow wrong. She'd spent most of her life believing that she needed to compensate for her perceived deficiencies, that being intelligent was just the best she could do when she couldn't be beautiful, that being useful was the price she had to pay for taking up space. But standing in that office, in that life she'd built through her own courage and skill, Evelyn finally understood the truth that had been there all along. She didn't need to compensate for anything. She never had. Being smart wasn't a substitute for being pretty. It was better. It was power. It was freedom. It was the ability to see patterns others missed, to solve problems others couldn't, to make a real and lasting difference in the world. And that was worth more than beauty could ever be. Because beauty faded, but capability endured. Appearance might open doors, but competence kept them open. You couldn't build a life on how you looked, but you could build an empire on what you knew. She turned off the lamp and walked back to the house, back to Caleb, back to the life that was hers now, in every way that mattered. The lonely woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow expecting nothing had discovered she deserved everything. And not because someone had given it to her, but because she'd earned it. Every inch, every triumph, every moment of respect. She'd earned it by being brave enough to speak up, by being smart enough to see what others missed, by being strong enough to stand her ground when powerful men tried to make her sit down and be quiet. She'd earned it by refusing to be less than she was, even when being more made people uncomfortable. And in doing so, she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that the right kind of belonging doesn't require you to shrink. It grows to fit you exactly as you are. It celebrates your strengths instead of asking you to hide them. It makes space for your voice instead of telling you to be silent. That was what she'd found in Red Hollow. Not just a husband or a home, but a place where being exactly who she was, brilliant, determined, uncompromising when it came to justice, was not just tolerated, but treasured. She'd found a place where she could finally stop apologizing for taking up space and start claiming all the space she needed. And in the end, that was worth more than anything else could ever be.